The brakes didn't respond. The driver's foot pressed harder, pumping the pedal, but it sank with no resistance. The heavy yellow school bus lurched forward, rattling on the rough county road, the sound of children's voices filling the cabin. Some kids laughed, others were jostled in their seats, and a few looked up as the driver's face tensed with panic. Ahead lay the railroad tracks, and moving across them was a long freight train. Dark, immense, unstoppable. The horn blared, echoing across the frozen fields. In seconds, the gap between the bus and the crossing closed. The driver yanked at the wheel, desperate, but there was no room, no escape. The last thing anyone saw was steel meeting steel in a thunderclap of destruction. It was December 14th, 1961, a cold morning on the plains outside Greeley, Colorado. For the families who lived there, the day had started in routine. Children were bundled in coats, kissed goodbye, and sent off on the school bus, as they had been countless times before. The bus was driven by 23-year-old Dwayne Harms, a newlywed who had taken the job only months earlier. Known as responsible and polite, Harms was the kind of young man parents trusted to carry their children across icy rural roads. That morning, he guided the bus along its familiar route, stopping at scattered farmhouses to collect students ranging from first graders to high school teenagers. The ride was typical for the kids, full of chatter about homework, Christmas plans, and basketball games. They crammed into the long bench seats, coats and books scattered along the aisle. The smell of damp wool and diesel hung in the air. To them, it was just another morning, nothing remarkable until the final approach to the crossing. The bus rolled toward County Road 43, where the Colorado and Southern Railroad tracks cut straight across the road. It was an unguarded crossing, marked only by crossbucks. There were no flashing lights, no gates, no alarms to warn of danger. It was left to drivers to stop, look, and listen. But that morning, Harms discovered the brakes were gone. At the same moment, a Colorado and Southern freight train was closing in on the intersection. Its engine hauled a long string of cars at nearly 60 miles per hour. The engineer, peering ahead through the cold air, spotted the school bus too late. He yanked the throttle into emergency, sparks bursting from the screaming wheels, but the enormous weight of the train made it impossible to stop in time. Witnesses in nearby fields would later recall the chilling sound of the horn, a warning that seemed to last forever but could not prevent the inevitable. The train struck the bus dead center. The impact ripped it apart, shearing the vehicle into twisted wreckage. The front half of the bus spun away, crumpled and crushed, while the back half was carried hundreds of feet down the tracks, scattering bodies and debris across the frozen ground. The noise was deafening. Metal tearing, glass exploding, and the cries of children thrown violently into the air. Some were flung clear of the wreckage and landed broken in the fields. Others were trapped inside the mangled shell. Neighbors who heard the collision ran toward the crossing. What they found was a scene of horror. Children lay in the dirt and snow, some unconscious, others calling for help. Survivors stumbled from the wreck, bleeding and disoriented. Farmers and passers-by pulled bodies from the debris, laying them gently on the roadside. Within minutes, ambulances and emergency crews arrived, their sirens wailing across the flat landscape. Doctors, nurses, and townspeople worked frantically, carrying survivors to hospitals in Greeley. Parents began to gather, desperate for word of their children. 20 children were killed outright, their ages spanning from grade school to late teens. Dozens more were injured, some critically. Nearly every family in the area was touched by the loss. The funerals that followed left an indelible mark on the community. Rows of small caskets, entire families grieving together in churches filled beyond capacity. For weeks, the townspeople mourned in unison, their grief compounded by the cruel ordinariness of the day that had led to such extraordinary tragedy. The investigation turned immediately to the condition of the bus. Inspectors confirmed the brakes had failed completely, Harms had no chance to stop. He was absolved of blame, though the young driver carried the weight of that morning for the rest of his life. Survivors recalled his desperate efforts, shouting, pulling at the wheel, doing everything possible as the bus hurtled forward. He lived, but he never escaped the memory of the 20 children who didn't. The crash drew national attention. How could a school bus carrying dozens of children be allowed to operate with faulty brakes? Why were so many rural crossings left unprotected by gates or warning signals? Public outrage mounted, and regulators were forced to act. In the years that followed, states across the country strengthened inspection requirements for school buses. Railroad crossings considered high risk were upgraded with flashing lights, gates, and alarms. The Greeley disaster became a turning point in transportation safety, shaping reforms that remain in place today. But for the families of Greeley, no reform could erase the grief. Survivors carried scars, both physical and emotional. Some returned to school with casts and crutches, others with empty seats beside them where friends had once sat. The crash became a permanent memory in the lives of those who lived through it, a moment frozen in time when ordinary routines dissolved into unimaginable tragedy. For parents who had sent their children out the door that morning, trust was broken forever. The crossing itself became a place of mourning. Flowers and small memorials appeared there in the days after, left by parents, neighbors, and strangers who came to grieve. Even as the years passed and the crossing was rebuilt with safety measures, its name remained synonymous with loss. People who had been children that day grew old, but they carried the weight of it still, the sound of the horn, the shudder of impact, the silence that followed. The Denver school bus crash of 1961 was not the first accident of its kind, and it would not be the last. But its scale, its horror, and its aftermath ensured it would be remembered. It revealed the vulnerabilities of a system that had taken too much for granted, where children's safety had relied on little more than luck and working machinery. In Greeley, luck failed. The result was 20 young lives cut short, a generation scarred, and a country forced to rethink how it protected its most vulnerable passengers. The reforms that came after were written in blood and grief. They were the price of inaction, paid not in dollars but in lives. And while those reforms saved countless children in the decades that followed, for the families of northern Colorado, they were too late. What remained was the memory of a December morning when trust in the system collapsed as completely as the bus beneath the weight of the train. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.